What would you do if a single glance turned your dignity into a crime? Imagine this. A man stands quietly at an airport gate, his only crime being the color of his skin. Within moments, he's in handcuffs, humiliated before a crowd of strangers. This isn't fiction. It's the shocking reality that unfolded for Dr. Marcus Ellison, a globally respected human rights lawyer. Dear viewer, brace yourself for a story that will grip your heart, challenge your mind, and ignite your sense of justice. Welcome to a tale of resilience, systemic failure, and the quiet power of truth. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you're watching from in the comments below. Let's build a community that amplifies unheard voices. Picture yourself in Dr. Ellison's shoes. You're a renowned scholar, holding a book and a boarding pass, when suspicion falls on you like a storm. What would you do next? Comment below with 1. If you'd confront the officers head-on, or 2. If you'd stay silent and gather evidence for later. We're eager to hear your thoughts. At Daily Narrated Stories, we bring you powerful narratives every day to inspire change. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers soon. Please hit that subscribe button and join us in this journey. Now let's dive into the story. It began with a delay. A 7:15 a.m. flight from London Heathrow to Toronto was delayed by 45 minutes due to heavy fog over the Atlantic. The scene at Terminal 5 was calm, filled with the soft murmur of announcements and the clatter of coffee cups. Amid the crowd, one man stood apart, not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't. Dr. Marcus Ellison, 64, waited in the business class line, his posture relaxed, a paperback in hand, his mind lost in its pages. Dr. Marcus Ellison was a striking figure, tall, dressed in a charcoal overcoat and tailored trousers, his graying beard neatly trimmed. His presence was understated yet commanding, a man accustomed to the rhythm of airports. He delivered over 250 lectures worldwide, most recently advising on international law at The Hague. That morning, though, he was just a traveler, anonymous, or so he thought. He carried a sleek leather satchel and a laptop bag, his boarding pass tucked into his coat pocket, his phone untouched as he reread a legal brief from a recent tribunal in Kiev, blue ink marking key phrases. The scent of fresh paper and ink grounded him, a familiar comfort amidst the sterile chaos of Heathrow. At the far end of the terminal lounge, near the floor-to-ceiling windows, sat Eleanor Whitmore. In her late 50s, with platinum blonde hair and pearl earrings, she exuded the confidence of someone who knew every detail of the first-class menu. Her husband, Charles, sat beside her, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to her growing unease. Eleanor's gaze locked onto Marcus. His stillness unnerved her. The way he didn't fidget, didn't glance around like the other passengers. It felt off. She adjusted her scarf, the silk cool against her skin, and leaned toward the gate agent, her voice low but firm. That man in the dark coat. He's too quiet, too focused. Something's not right. Her heart raced slightly, a mix of self-assuredness and a nagging fear she couldn't place. The agent hesitated, her fingers hovering over the desk phone. He's in the business queue, ma'am. He cleared security like everyone else. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her lips pursing in frustration. I've traveled enough to trust my instincts. Report it, please, before something happens. Her words carried the weight of authority, and the agent complied, though a flicker of doubt crossed her face. A radio call crackled through to 2 officers stationed near Gate B16. Suspicious passenger, male, mid-60s, possibly observing the area. No visible threat yet. The message echoed in the officers' earpieces, a directive that felt both urgent and vague, setting the stage for a confrontation that would unravel in ways none of them could predict. Officer Daniel Harper, young and brash, stood up, cracking his knuckles with a smirk. He thrived on the power his badge gave him, believing it sharpened his instincts to a razor's edge. His uniform felt like armor, each step he took echoing with purpose on the polished floor. His partner, Officer Thomas Reed, older and more reserved, followed with a sigh, his eyes betraying a flicker of doubt. Reed's hands fidgeted with the edge of his vest, a nervous habit he couldn't shake. He'd seen too many calls like this go wrong, but Harper's confidence was infectious and dangerous. They didn't ask for more details. They didn't check the footage. They didn't care to. Their boots clicked in unison as they approached, the sound a stark contrast to the soft hum of the terminal. Marcus had just stepped forward in line, his passport ready, when he sensed the shift. The air seemed to thicken, the murmurs of the crowd fading as two officers approached, one on each side, their steps deliberate. He turned to face them, his expression unreadable, as if he'd known this moment was coming. The faint scent of coffee from a nearby kiosk lingered, a bitter reminder of the normalcy he'd been denied. His heart beat steadily, not from fear, but from a deep, unshakable resolve. He'd faced warlords in courtrooms, stared down corruption in boardrooms. This was just another battlefield, one he hadn't chosen but was ready to fight. "Sir," Harper barked, his tone sharp, cutting through the ambient noise. "We need to speak with you." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes assessing. "Regarding what?" he asked, his voice a calm anchor in the rising tension. "A complaint," Reed added, his voice softer, almost apologetic, his eyes darting nervously to the crowd. "You're making passengers uncomfortable." Marcus blinked once, his voice steady, each word measured like a chess move. "I've been standing here, reading. I'd like to know the nature of this complaint." Harper stepped closer, his shadow looming over Marcus, his breath heavy with impatience. "Step out of line. We need to see your bag." Passengers began to turn, their curiosity piqued. Some pulled out their phones to record, others whispered, their voices a low buzz that seemed to vibrate through the terminal. A young father pulled his daughter closer, his grip tightening as uncertainty clouded his eyes, his breath catching as he watched the scene unfold. Marcus stepped aside, not out of fear, but with a calculated calm. His mind was already racing, noting every detail. The officers' postures, the crowd's reactions, the faint hum of the terminal's air conditioning that seemed to grow louder in the tense silence. The cold marble floor beneath his feet felt unyielding, a stark contrast to the warmth of the book still clutched in his hand. "My name is Dr. Marcus Ellison," he said evenly, his voice a steady anchor in the rising storm. "I'm a legal advisor to the UN Human Rights Council, and I've cleared every international checkpoint required." "What exactly am I suspected of?" Harper's jaw tightened, his fingers twitching near his belt, his frustration palpable. "That's what we're here to find out. Let's go," he snapped, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Am I under arrest?" Marcus asked, his tone unwavering, his gaze locked on Harper's, searching for a crack in his resolve. "Not yet," Harper replied, his voice clipped. "But your cooperation is required." Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line, his mind cataloging the legal implications of every word, every action. "Then I'd like your badge numbers before we proceed," he said, his voice firm but calm, a quiet challenge that hung in the air like a storm cloud. The request seemed to strike Harper like a physical blow, his face darkening with irritation. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by someone he'd already judged as a threat based on nothing more than a whisper and a glance. "We're not doing this here," Harper snapped, stepping into Marcus's space, his breath hot with impatience. "Easy way or hard way, your choice." Marcus didn't flinch, his body still as stone, but his mind was a whirlwind of strategy, mapping out every possible outcome. "There's only one lawful way," he replied, his voice a quiet thunder that seemed to echo through the terminal. And with that, the sharp click of handcuffs reverberated through the space, a sound that felt like a gunshot in the quiet. The cold metal bit into Marcus's wrists, a searing reminder of the injustice unfolding. His breath caught for a moment, not from pain, but from the weight of history pressing down on him, the ghosts of countless others who'd faced this same indignity whispering in his ears, their voices a chorus of resilience and rage. Gasps rippled through the crowd, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the air from the room. Eleanor sat back, a faint smirk on her lips, satisfied that her instincts had been right. But beneath her smug exterior, a flicker of doubt began to stir. What if she'd been wrong? What if her fear had just ruined a man's day, his dignity, his sense of safety? Charles didn't look up from his phone, his indifference a stark contrast to the drama unfolding, his fingers scrolling through a world that didn't include the man in handcuffs. The gate agent froze, her hand hovering over the phone, her heart pounding as she debated whether to escalate further, her breath shallow with indecision. But it was too late. Dr. Marcus Ellison, a world-renowned scholar, was now in handcuffs, not for what he'd done, but for how he appeared, for the shadow someone else cast on him. Harper gripped Marcus's arm tightly, leading him through the terminal, his fingers digging into the fabric of Marcus's coat, leaving faint creases in the charcoal wool. Each step felt like a march through history, the echoes of systemic bias reverberating in the polished halls, the scent of disinfectant and coffee mingling in the air. Reed followed, his jaw tight, his eyes darting to the growing crowd of onlookers, their faces a mix of shock, fear, and curiosity. A teenage boy in a red hoodie held his phone steady, capturing every moment, his hands trembling with a mix of fear and determination, his breath fogging the screen as he whispered to his friend, "This isn't right." Marcus's face remained impassive, but inside, a fire burned, a fire fueled by every lecture he'd given on justice, every case he'd fought for the voiceless, every moment he'd spent dismantling systems of oppression. He wouldn't let this moment define him, but he'd make sure it defined the system that allowed it, his resolve hardening with each step, each clink of the cuffs. The man they detained hadn't raised his voice, hadn't resisted, hadn't even shown a hint of fear. But what they didn't know, what they hadn't bothered to ask, was who he truly was. And soon, that ignorance would unravel everything they thought they knew. The hallway to the security office was stark, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the tiled floor. There was a constant reminder of the cold reality Marcus now faced. It felt colder here, not from the temperature, but from the weight of what it represented. A place where dignity was stripped away, where silence was mistaken for guilt. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, a clinical scent that clashed with the chaos of the moment, a sterile backdrop to the raw emotion playing out. Harper's grip on Marcus's arm never loosened, even though there was no struggle to restrain. The cuffs remained, biting into Marcus's wrists, a constant reminder of the moment's injustice, the metal a cold, unyielding presence against his skin. Each step echoed with the clink of metal, a sound that seemed to mock the principles Marcus had dedicated his life to upholding, each note a dagger in his heart. He didn't speak as they passed travelers who averted their eyes, pretending not to notice, their hurried footsteps a stark contrast to his measured pace, their avoidance a silent complicity in the injustice unfolding. He didn't ask why this was happening. He already knew. But knowing didn't dull the sting. It sharpened it, like a blade pressed against his resolve, cutting through the layers of composure to reveal the raw determination beneath, a fire that burned brighter with every step. In a small, gray room with metal chairs and a flickering light, Harper pushed the door open with a rough shove, the hinges creaking in protest. "Sit," he ordered, his voice a growl that seemed to reverberate off the bare walls. Marcus sat slowly, deliberately, the cuffs digging deeper as he adjusted, the chair cold against his thighs, the metal biting through his trousers, a physical echo of the emotional chill in the room. Reed stood in the corner, arms crossed, his face a mask of unease, his eyes flickering to the light above. Its erratic was a mirror to his own uncertainty. The silence in the room was heavy, not empty, but charged with unspoken truth, a truth that pulsed like a heartbeat, growing louder with each passing second, a rhythm that Marcus could feel in his bones. "State your name," Harper demanded, grabbing a clipboard, his pen scratching harshly against the paper, the sound grating in the tense silence. "You have my identification," Marcus replied, his tone clipped but controlled, each word a deliberate step in a dance he knew too well, a dance he'd performed in courtrooms across the globe. "I asked for your name." Harper pressed, his voice rising with irritation, his patience fraying like a worn thread. "Dr. Marcus Ellison, professor, legal consultant to human rights tribunals, recently retained by the International Criminal Court in The Hague," Marcus said, his words a shield, a reminder of the power he held. Even in this moment of vulnerability, his voice steady as a drumbeat. Harper didn't look up, scribbling something and muttering, "Possible alias," under his breath, his skepticism a wall Marcus would have to dismantle brick by brick, his disbelief a fortress built on prejudice. But Reed's eyes snapped to Marcus, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps fear, crossing his face, his hands dropping to his sides, fingers twitching as if he wanted to reach for something. His radio, perhaps, or the truth he'd ignored. Something shifted in the room, a crack in the facade of authority, a fissure that seemed to widen with each breath. "What am I being detained for?" Marcus asked, his calmness a quiet rebuke, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, each word a precise incision into the heart of their assumptions. "Suspicious behavior," Harper said, reaching for a tablet, his movements jerky with frustration, his fingers fumbling as he swiped at the screen. "You were watching people's bags. We'll review footage soon. Were you aware I'd cleared passport control and TSA with no issues?" Marcus countered, his tone a challenge wrapped in calm, his eyes never leaving Harper's, searching for a crack in his armor. "Doesn't matter," Harper said, dismissing him with a wave, his eyes narrowing as he clung to his narrative, his voice tight with the strain of maintaining control. "That was before the report." "A report based on whose suspicion?" Marcus asked, his voice soft but piercing, each word a needle pricking at the inflated confidence of the officers, a question that seemed to hang in the air like a storm cloud. Harper leaned in, eyes narrowed, his breath heavy with the scent of stale coffee, his face inches from Marcus's. "You're getting defensive, sir. Makes you look guilty," he said, his voice low and threatening, his words meant to intimidate. "Guilty of what?" Marcus replied, his gaze steady, unflinching, a lighthouse in the storm of Harper's aggression. "Of reading in silence?" The question hung in the air, a quiet indictment of the absurdity of the situation, a challenge that Harper couldn't ignore. Reed shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting with his vest, a nervous tick Marcus noted instantly, a tell he'd seen in countless courtrooms, a sign of doubt, of a conscience stirring beneath the uniform. Here, it was a crack in the foundation of their authority, a fissure that Marcus knew how to widen, a weakness he could exploit with the precision of a seasoned lawyer. The air grew thicker, the tension palpable, as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for the next move, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls, a silent witness to the drama unfolding. Harper leaned closer, his voice low and threatening, his face inches from Marcus's. "You want to play semantics, Professor? Fine. But in this room, I asked the questions," he growled, his words meant to intimidate, but they only fueled Marcus's resolve, his mind already mapping out the legal arguments he'd use to dismantle this injustice. Marcus met his gaze, unflinching, his voice a quiet storm, resonant with the authority of decades spent in courtrooms, facing down tyrants and corrupt officials. "That," he said, "is precisely the problem." The words landed like a gavel, a quiet declaration that this was no longer just an interrogation. It was a trial of the system itself, a trial Marcus was determined to win. Outside, the airport buzzed with a different energy. A teenage girl's shaky video of Marcus's arrest, captioned, "Is this justice?" had already spread online, racking up 20,000 views in 25 minutes, its grainy quality only heightening its impact, the shaky frame a mirror to the instability of the justice it depicted. The comments were a storm of outrage and support, voices from around the world weighing in, some calling for justice, others sharing their own stories of profiling, their words a chorus of pain and resilience that echoed across continents. But the footage spoke loudest, a distinguished black man in a charcoal coat, handcuffed, surrounded, his dignity under siege, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos around him. Back in the security room, the silence stretched taut, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls, a silent witness to the tension within. Reed finally spoke, his voice hesitant, breaking the tension like a pebble dropped in still water. "Maybe we should double-check his ID," he said, his voice trembling, his hands shaking as he stepped forward. Harper ignored him, his focus locked on Marcus, but Reed scanned Marcus's ID into the terminal, the screen flashing. UK residency, UN credentials, international legal status, confirmed. "Sir," Reed said, his voice trembling, his hands shaking as he held the ID, his eyes wide with realization. "He's who he says he is." The words were a lifeline, a chance to step back from the edge, but Harper wasn't ready to let go of his power, his face reddening with defiance. Harper snatched the ID back, his movements sharp with frustration, his fingers leaving faint smudges on the plastic. "We'll verify through official channels." "We're not done," he said, his voice tight, his control slipping like sand through his fingers. But Marcus raised his cuffed wrists slowly, placing them on the table with deliberate calm, the clink of metal a stark reminder of the stakes, a sound that seemed to echo through the room like a judge's gavel. "No," he said, his voice a quiet storm, resonant with the authority of decades spent in courtrooms, facing down tyrants and corrupt officials. "You're done." The words carried the weight of history, of every case he'd fought, every life he'd defended, a declaration that reverberated through the room, shaking the foundation of Harper's authority. Harper froze, suddenly unsure of his power, his confidence crumbling like sand under the tide of Marcus's resolve, his hands clenching into fists as he grappled with the reality of his mistake. A sharp knock at the door broke the tension, the sound echoing like a thunderclap in the small room, a sudden interruption that made Reed jump. It wasn't an officer. It was a man in a navy suit, holding a silver badge against the glass, his presence a sudden shift in the room's dynamics, a new player in a game that had just changed. Reed opened the door, his movements hesitant, as if he knew this moment would change everything, his breath shallow with anticipation. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his hands trembling as he gripped the door handle. The man stepped inside, his presence commanding, his suit crisp against the drab backdrop of the room, his badge glinting under the flickering light. "Agent Nathan Carver, International Legal Oversight Division. You're detaining a UN-affiliated legal officer without grounds. This ends now," he said, his voice a blade of authority, cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. Harper bristled, his face reddening with defiance, his hands clenching into fists. "We're conducting an investigation," he said, his voice tight, his control slipping further with each word. Carver cut him off, his voice unyielding, his gaze piercing. "You're conducting an unlawful detainment. We've been contacted by the Canadian Embassy, Interpol, and the Hague's oversight desk. You're holding a man who trains judges on international law," he said, his words a damning indictment, a spotlight on the officer's failure. The room fell silent, the air thick with realization, the weight of their mistake pressing down on the officers like a physical force, their breath shallow as the reality of their actions settled in. Carver turned to Marcus, his tone softening but firm, his eyes meeting Marcus's with respect. "We've confirmed your identity and can escort you under international protocol. Do you require medical attention?" he asked, his voice a lifeline in the storm of the moment. "I do not," Marcus said, his voice steady, his eyes never leaving Carver's, his composure a shield against the chaos around him. "But I require documentation, a full report, and badge numbers. And these," he lifted his wrists, the cuffs glinting under the flickering light, "must be removed immediately." Reed stepped forward, his hands shaking as he unlocked the cuffs, the metal clinking softly as it fell away, a sound that seemed to echo with the weight of their mistake. I'm sorry, sir," he stammered, his voice cracking with guilt, his eyes unable to meet Marcus's, his hands trembling as he stepped back. Marcus met his gaze, his eyes piercing but not unkind, a quiet strength in his expression. "You didn't ask who I was. What you do next matters more," he said, his words a lifeline, but also a challenge, a call to accountability that Reed couldn't ignore, a call that lingered in the air like a promise. Harper stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, his face pale as the reality of his actions crashed over him. Carver turned to him, his gaze unyielding, his voice a quiet storm. "You'll be contacted by Internal Affairs. I suggest you retain counsel," he said, his words a final nail in the coffin of Harper's authority, a warning that echoed through the room. Marcus stood, his movements slow and deliberate, his dignity intact despite the marks on his wrists, the faint red lines a testament to the injustice he'd endured. He didn't look back as he walked out, but the world was watching, the weight of their gazes a silent promise that this moment would not be forgotten. The terminal had returned to its rhythm, scanners beeping, travelers chatting. But something had shifted, a crack in the facade of normalcy that couldn't be ignored, a quiet tremor that rippled through the space. In the operations room, Agent Carver stood tall, a file on the desk before him, its edges worn from travel, a silent testament to the weight of the moment. 3 officers sat across from him, their faces a mix of dread and disbelief, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and fear, a tangible reminder of the stakes at play. Harper hadn't spoken since removing the cuffs, his disbelief a heavy weight, his uniform suddenly feeling like a costume rather than armor, his hands clenched into fists as he grappled with the reality of his actions. Carver opened the file, the sound of paper slicing through the silence like a blade, a sound that seemed to echo with the weight of justice. "Let's review," he said, his voice sharp, each word a hammer striking at their assumptions, a call to accountability that they couldn't ignore. "You detained a passenger with no record, no suspicious items, and a verified ticket, based on one woman's vague concern." Harper muttered, his voice barely audible, his throat tight with the weight of his mistake. "She said he was watching bags," he said, his words a feeble defense, a whisper against the storm of truth. "You mean sitting with his own luggage?" Carver asked, his tone unyielding, his eyes boring into Harper's, searching for a shred of reason in his actions. "We reviewed the footage, terminal cams, gate feeds. He didn't move for 30 minutes, Carver continued, his voice a steady drumbeat of truth, each word a nail in the coffin of their assumptions. Carver placed a photo on the table, Marcus Ellison at a UN conference, surrounded by diplomats, the caption reading, "Lead Counsel, International Human Rights Commission." The image was a stark reminder of the man they'd wronged, his calm demeanor a contrast to their rash actions, a mirror reflecting their failure back at them. "A 60-second ID check would have shown this," Carver said, his voice a mix of frustration and disbelief, his hand steady as he pointed to the photo. "Instead, you handcuffed a man who's written legal frameworks for 12 countries." Reed shifted, his voice small, his hands trembling as he spoke, his eyes unable to meet Carver's. "I didn't know," he began, his voice breaking, his guilt a heavy weight on his shoulders. "That's the issue," Carver interrupted, his tone cutting, his words a damning indictment of their actions. "You didn't ask. You assumed," he said, his voice a quiet storm, a call to accountability that echoed through the room. A second agent entered, handing Carver a tablet, the screen glowing with the weight of their mistake, a digital testament to the global impact of their actions. "The footage is viral, sir. Over 600,000 views in an hour. Media outlets are covering it," the agent said, his voice steady but urgent, his hands steady as he handed over the tablet. The tablet showed Marcus in his coat, handcuffed, the headline reading, "Human rights expert wrongfully detained at Heathrow." Passengers uploaded clearer videos, witnesses tagged journalists, and Marcus's name trended, not as a victim, but as a symbol, a beacon of resilience in the face of injustice. The comments section was a battlefield, with voices from around the world weighing in, some calling for justice, others sharing their own stories of profiling, their words a chorus of pain and resilience that echoed across continents, a global cry for change. At the gate, Eleanor Whitmore sat by the window, her scarf tied around her shoulders, her eyes darting nervously, her breath shallow as she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She hadn't expected this escalation, hadn't expected him to matter, hadn't expected her whisper to ignite a firestorm. Her phone buzzed. A friend had sent a link, the notification a jarring interruption to her thoughts. She opened it and froze. Marcus Ellison, his credentials, and a clip from a TED Talk on racial profiling in transit hubs, his calm voice a stark contrast to the chaos she'd caused. The irony hit her like a wave, her stomach churning with regret, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone, the screen's glow a harsh spotlight on her mistake. She remembered the TED Talk now, Marcus's calm voice, his piercing analysis of systemic bias, the very bias she'd just perpetuated with a single whisper. Around her, whispers grew, a murmur of judgment that felt like a physical weight, a chorus of disapproval that she couldn't escape. A teenager pointed her way, a woman murmured to her child, their eyes accusing, their gazes a mirror reflecting her actions back at her. Eleanor shrank into her seat, feeling the weight of their gazes, her privilege suddenly a fragile shield against the storm she'd unleashed, her heart pounding with the realization of what she'd done. In the lounge above, a journalist began a story, The Price of Prejudice, how one whisper ignited a global incident. The words were sharp, unsparing, and true, each sentence a mirror reflecting Eleanor's actions back at her, a condemnation she couldn't escape. She wanted to disappear, to rewind the clock, but the damage was done, her name now synonymous with a question. What did you see? What did it cost? Downstairs, Carver addressed Marcus in front of airport staff and legal reps, his voice formal but urgent, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of the moment. Dr. Ellison, do you wish to make a statement? He asked, his voice a lifeline, a chance for Marcus to reclaim his narrative. Marcus stood, his posture unyielding, his charcoal coat a symbol of the dignity he'd never lost, his presence a quiet storm in the room. Not yet, he said, his voice a quiet command, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in every face, every flicker of guilt or realization. There's something more important than my words. What's that? A rep asked, her pen poised over her notepad, her breath held in anticipation, her eyes wide with curiosity. That you listen, Marcus replied, his eyes piercing, his voice a steady drumbeat of truth. Not just to me, but to the system that allowed this. Unless it changes, this won't be the last time. The silence that followed was heavy with agreement, a collective acknowledgement of the truth he'd laid bare, a moment of reckoning that couldn't be ignored. Carver spoke again, his voice formal, resonant with the weight of the moment. For the record, this is Dr. Marcus Ellison, legal advisor to the United Nations, professor of international law, and recipient of the Global Justice Award. He said, his words a declaration, a restoration of Marcus's identity in the face of those who'd sought to erase it. Harper exhaled sharply, as if struck, his hands clenching into fists as the reality of his actions crashed over him, his breath shallow with the weight of his mistake. Reed sat down, overwhelmed, his face pale as the weight of their mistake settled into his bones, his hands trembling as he grappled with the truth. Marcus turned and walked out, the cameras following, not for spectacle, but for accountability, their lenses a silent promise to bear witness, a testament to the power of truth in the face of injustice. The room was stark, its beige walls failing to offer comfort, the air thick with the scent of fear and regret, a tangible reminder of the stakes at play. At a long conference table sat Marcus Ellison, the marks on his wrists a faint reminder of the cuffs, a physical echo of the emotional scars he carried, a testament to the injustice he'd endured. Across from him were 5 officials, 2 from the Crown Prosecution Service, 1 from the Metropolitan Police Oversight Board, and 2 observers from the Global Rights Alliance. Their faces a mix of apprehension and respect, their breath shallow as they awaited his words. The air buzzed with tension, the weight of a moment that couldn't be ignored, a moment that would define the future of justice in transit hubs around the world. Marcus didn't pace or dramatize, his movements deliberate, his presence a quiet storm that seemed to fill the room. He sat, spine straight, eyes sharp, a man who'd spent decades untangling systemic failures across borders, his hands steady as he prepared to speak. He never imagined he'd face such a violation on British soil, at a boarding gate, forced to recount it as a case study before stunned officials. But this wasn't about closure. It was about reform, about turning a personal wound into a weapon for change, a mission that burned in his chest like a fire. He spoke with precision, recounting the incident, the baseless complaint, the unverified suspicion, the cold steel on his skin that had felt like a betrayal of everything he'd fought for, a moment that had seared itself into his memory like a brand. His voice didn't waver, each word cutting through the silence, a scalpel slicing through the layers of denial, a call to action that echoed through the room. This wasn't a mistake, he said, his eyes locking onto each official in turn, his gaze a challenge they couldn't ignore. It was a system designed to fail, upheld by habit, by a refusal to question, to see beyond the surface. An observer, Barrister Clara Bennett, leaned forward, her glasses slipping slightly as she spoke, her voice tinged with curiosity and respect. "You're saying the officers didn't act alone?" she asked, her pen poised over her notepad, her breath held in anticipation. "They acted with the confidence of a system that never demanded better questions," Marcus replied, his voice a steady drumbeat of truth, each word a hammer striking at the foundation of the system that had wronged him. "They were trained to fear shadows, not to seek facts," he continued, his words a diagnosis, a call to action that reverberated beyond the walls of that room, a promise to the countless others who'd been silenced. Behind a glass panel, Ethics auditors scribbled notes, their pens scratching furiously against paper, a sound that seemed to echo the urgency of the moment, a chorus of accountability that couldn't be ignored. This wasn't just testimony, it was a diagnosis, and Marcus was mapping a way out, a blueprint for a system that could heal rather than harm, a vision that burned in his eyes like a fire. His words were a call to action, a demand for accountability that reverberated beyond the walls of that room, a promise to the countless others who'd been silenced, a vow he'd keep with every breath he had. The footage had gone global, Marcus's name a headline that refused to fade, a beacon of hope in a world too often darkened by injustice. Politicians commented, editorials called for reform, but Marcus didn't let it become a fleeting moment, a viral blip in the news cycle. From his jacket, he pulled a leather folder, its edges worn from travel, revealing the Global Transit Equity Protocol, a framework for accountability in transportation law enforcement, with independent audits, transparent reporting, and mandatory anti-bias training every 12 months. He slid copies across the table, the sound of paper against wood a quiet promise of change, a testament to his resolve. "I drafted this on my flight home," he said, his voice steady, his eyes meeting each official's in turn, his gaze a challenge they couldn't ignore. "This isn't a reaction, it's a solution," he continued, his words a vow, a promise to the countless others who'd been silenced, a vow he'd keep with every breath he had. The silence was stunned, not skeptical, the officials' faces a mix of awe and apprehension, their breath shallow as they grappled with the weight of his proposal. No one expected the man handcuffed at Gate 19 to return with a legislative blueprint, a plan to dismantle the very system that had wronged him, a vision that burned in his eyes like a fire. In another wing, Harper and Reed sat in separate rooms, their uniforms gone, the weight of their actions heavy, a burden they couldn't escape. Harper stared at a viral photo of Marcus, his calm face a stark contrast to the cuffs, the image a mirror reflecting his own failure back at him, a condemnation he couldn't ignore. Something broke inside him, his pride, once a shield, now a burden, a stone in his throat that he couldn't swallow, a weight that pressed down on him with every breath. An investigator leaned in, her voice calm but firm, her eyes piercing as she spoke. "Officer Harper, what did you know about Dr. Ellison when you approached him?" "Nothing," Harper admitted, his voice hoarse, his hands trembling as he spoke, his eyes unable to meet hers. "Just what the woman said." He looked off. He continued, his voice breaking, his guilt a heavy weight on his shoulders. "Off?" the investigator echoed, circling the word on her notepad, her pen a quiet judge, her gaze unyielding. "And you didn't question that?" she asked, her voice a challenge, a call to accountability that Harper couldn't ignore. "I didn't think I had to," Harper said, his voice breaking, the weight of his mistake a physical ache, a pain that seared through him like a fire. "That's the problem," the investigator replied, her words a final nail in the coffin of his certainty, a condemnation that echoed through the room, a call to accountability that he couldn't ignore. Back in the conference room, Marcus answered questions about systemic fixes, his voice a steady guide through the storm of reform, his presence a beacon of hope in a world too often darkened by injustice. "What would you have done differently?" an official asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and respect, her eyes wide with anticipation. "I'd create checkpoints for decisions," Marcus said, his tone unyielding, his words a blueprint for a future where justice wasn't a privilege but a right. "Every complaint must be corroborated, every action documented. Respect before escalation," he continued, his voice a steady drumbeat of truth, a call to action that reverberated through the room. His proposal called for public dashboards, encrypted rights monitoring, and citizen access to complaint outcomes within 30 days. It was bold, costly, and necessary, a blueprint for a future where justice wasn't a privilege but a right, a vision that burned in his eyes like a fire. That night, Marcus sat in his hotel room overlooking the Thames, the city's lights shimmering below, a constellation of hope in the darkness, a reminder of the world he was fighting for. His phone buzzed with messages, victims of profiling, law students, retired judges offering support, their words a lifeline in the quiet night, a chorus of voices that echoed his own. He opened his laptop, adding a final clause to his protocol. Personnel executing unverified detainment will face immediate suspension pending review. Then he wrote, "We cannot heal what we refuse to record. Trust cannot grow in silence." The words were a promise, a vow to the countless others who'd been silenced, a vow he'd keep with every breath he had. To deepen the emotional impact, let's pause here for a story from the Silenced Files archive Marcus would later create. A single mother, Aisha Carter, 34, was detained at a Paris train station last year, her toddler crying as officers searched her bags for no reason, her screams echoing through the station like a siren of despair. "I felt invisible," Aisha wrote, "like my humanity didn't matter." Her story, one of thousands, fueled Marcus's resolve, a reminder of the countless others who'd been silenced, a call to action that echoed through his heart like a drumbeat. The storm that began at a boarding gate was now a legislative force, built on quiet truths and the courage to demand better, a storm that would change the world. The sky above the courthouse was a dull gray, heavy with the scent of past fires, a reminder of the battles fought and the battles yet to come. People gathered outside, not to protest, but to reflect, sharing stories of Marcus Ellison, the man who'd walked through Heathrow carrying only a coat, a briefcase, and a legacy that shook systemic silence. Their voices a chorus of hope in the darkness. This wasn't just Marcus's story anymore. It was a movement, a tidal wave of change that couldn't be stopped. He'd spoken to the press only once, in a classroom at the University of Nairobi, before law students whose eyes burned with purpose, their hands scribbling notes as he spoke. He didn't dwell on the cuffs, bruises, or the humiliation, the marks on his wrists a faint reminder of the injustice he'd endured. He spoke of systems, erosion, and what happens when protectors presume guilt, his voice a steady drumbeat of truth that echoed through the room. "The question," he said, "isn't whether the law is blind, but whether those enforcing it ever learned to see." That quote echoed in journals, on protest signs, even tattooed on a young lawyer's arm in Vancouver, a testament to the power of his words, a call to action that reverberated across the globe. But Marcus didn't want to be a soundbite. He wanted impact, a legacy that would outlast the headlines, a movement that would change the world. He founded the Ellison Institute for Systemic Truth, a legal, media, and policy collective focused on data-driven advocacy and litigation, a beacon of hope in a world too often darkened by injustice. Within 6 months, the Institute launched 5 investigations into profiling in transit hubs, overturned 3 deportation rulings, and proposed mandatory oversight laws in 6 countries, a testament to the power of his vision, a legacy that would endure. More powerfully, it created the Silenced Voices Archive, a digital collection of civilian stories, those wrongfully stopped, profiled, or detained for their identity. Their voices a chorus of resilience that echoed through the digital world. The tagline read, "We speak for the unheard," a promise that Marcus would keep with every breath he had. Marcus now spent his days training the next generation, speaking at community centers, translating legal language into tools people could wield like shields, his voice a steady guide through the storm of reform. Through it all, he carried the same calm that had once been mistaken for a threat, a calm that now became the center of his strength, a beacon of hope in a world too often darkened by injustice. The world saw a black man arrested without cause, but it remembered a man who didn't flinch, who faced power with grace and never lowered his voice to be heard, a man whose legacy would endure. Officer Harper faced sentencing, as did Reed, their uniforms gone, their actions a heavy weight they couldn't escape. The system moved slowly, but publicly, a testament to the power of accountability, a call to action that echoed through the halls of justice. Eleanor Whitmore faced her own reckoning, not in court, but in the unraveling of her privilege, her name now synonymous with a question: what did you see? What did it cost? Another story from the Silenced Voices Archive, a 19-year-old student, Ravi Patel, detained at a Chicago airport for looking nervous. He missed his sister's wedding, his dreams of studying abroad delayed by the trauma, his voice trembling as he wrote, "I felt like a criminal for existing." Marcus's institute gave Ravi's story a platform, ensuring it wasn't forgotten, a testament to the power of his vision, a legacy that would endure. The cost of Eleanor's whisper was a legacy rewritten, not hers, but Marcus's. He didn't just survive that airport. He reshaped what came after. Dr. Marcus Ellison never set out to make history that day at Heathrow. He wanted only a quiet flight, the dignity of moving through the world without being reduced to a stereotype. But the system didn't see his accolades, his service, or his sacrifice. It saw only his skin, his stillness, and its own biases. A whisper became suspicion, suspicion became escalation, and escalation became handcuffs. Yet through it all, Marcus never lost his footing. He didn't shout, didn't plead. He stood in his truth, forcing the truth to surface, a beacon of resilience in a world too often darkened by injustice. When the world learned who Marcus was, a human rights strategist, a legal scholar, a former UN commissioner, it faced a stark reality. If this could happen to him, what happens daily to those without his platform? That question sparked a movement. But Marcus didn't seek revenge or the spotlight. Through the Ellison Institute, he amplified stories that would have faded, creating a mechanism for justice that others could access, a legacy that would endure. From airport policies to public complaint systems, from digital archives to legal training, Marcus turned a personal violation into a global blueprint for change, a testament to the power of resilience, a call to action that echoed through the halls of justice. His legacy isn't a viral video or a verdict. It's the ripple effect of resilience, the way one act of quiet defiance can ignite thousands across borders and beliefs. So what does this mean for us? Dignity isn't earned through titles. It's a birthright we must protect. In a world that judges too quickly and listens too slowly, we have a role. Maybe it's recording an injustice or asking, what if that were me? Reflect on this. Have you ever witnessed or experienced profiling? Share your story in the comments. We're listening, and your voice matters. A voice that can echo through the halls of justice. A voice that can change the world. At Daily Narrated Stories, we're committed to sharing life-changing narratives that inspire and uplift. Stories that remind us of the power of resilience, the importance of justice, the strength of the human spirit. Marcus's story is a mirror, a map, and a mandate. Stand in your truth, even when the world misunderstands, even when the odds are stacked against you. We're racing to 1,000 subscribers. Don't miss out. Subscribe now, share this story, and comment to ensure no tale like Marcus's is buried again. Time is fleeting, and your action today can amplify the unheard. Let's make the next story heard because someone like you cared enough to act. Right here, right now.